Life Audio.
You're listening to Therapy and Theology, and I'm your host, Carly Mercoulier. This podcast is a space where we explore popular topics and questions related to the convergence of faith, feelings, spiritual formation, and more. My prayer is that through these conversations, we will grow in our awareness of who we are as beloved children of God, learn to acknowledge our needs and emotions with curiosity and compassion, and rediscover the purpose and power of our unique stories through the lens of the gospel. As a licensed therapist and ministry leader, I want to give voice to the many questions we face while cultivating a clearer view of how our faith informs our healing journey. I don't have all the answers, but I am committed to going deeper and walking together. So whether you've been to therapy or know exactly what you believe when it comes to theology, I want to invite you to join this journey as we fearlessly name the complexities of our present reality and press into the hope of the gospel story. So are you ready? Let's jump into today's question and begin this journey together. Hey friends, welcome back to Therapy and Theology. Today's episode is a bonus episode, and it is also the final episode of the 2023-2024 season. This season on the podcast, we have covered so much in relation to what it means to live an embodied life. And I get the privilege of introducing you to three of my really good friends as we have a conversation about this concept of running as an analogy for the spiritual journey. And so last week on the podcast, I talked about my process of learning to pace well, and you'll get to hear from three other people, dear friends of mine, that also share their insights and experiences in this concept of running and how it relates to their spiritual journey. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you guys. And today with me in the studio, I have three of my good friends. We're going to talk a little bit more about this analogy of running and how it connects to our spiritual journey and our spiritual growth. And so I'm going to introduce each one of them, and then we'll all kind of dive into sharing about our own process, as I did last week, and talking about pace and how that's important for the spiritual journey. Today, we're going to talk about all of these things in the context of community. So I have with me today, Dane, Ellie, and Nas, and the three of us are just going to share a little bit more about this process that we have been walking through in our journey with running. And so can each of you just take a minute to introduce yourself and maybe share how we came to know each other?
I'm Dane Rudy, and I met Carly actually through Nas. But I will say, I feel like we really connected over a freezing triathlon.
Yes.
I'm not really sure how we made it through that, but we did. And I thought that was our true bonding moment weekend. We almost got taken out by the waves in the water, but we did.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. I'm excited. Ellie, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ellie Dicesare, and I met Carly at church, at Gospel Community that was held. It was like a small group, and Carly led that. And so through that time, we became a lot better friends, and since then have still been good friends. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep.
Nas?
I'm Nas, and I'm Carolyn Nascimento, and I met Carl's after church one day. So if you know anything about Carl, she's always meeting with people, coffee after church, and so I met her there, and the rest is history. We've been besties ever since.
So true. Awesome. I'm so excited to have these women talking with me today, because there's something that I've learned in the last several years is that I can't do life alone. And so as we were running our half marathon a few weeks ago, each of these ladies, we were all just laughing about what this experience has been like for us in our training, and how there's been hard weeks and there's been good weeks and there's been good runs, but how it really goes back to connecting to our spiritual journey. And so as we were running this half marathon a few weeks ago, and we started just kind of making these connections. And so I was talking about this sharing about pace that I talked about last week. And then they each were sharing about their own spiritual journey through running. And I thought this would be so great to capture. So I'd love for us to start with Danae, if you would mind starting us off with kind of your experience with running and what it's kind of taught you about the spiritual journey.
Yeah, for sure. So I can remember like back in high school thinking about, oh, one day I want to, do races and things. And so, but it was, in some ways, it was kind of a pipe dream. Like I just didn't think that maybe I was capable of that.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, met friends through college and you guys after college who really have pushed me to do races that are like much longer than I ever anticipated. And so I've actually come to really love long distance running. And this is the second half marathon I've done. And the last couple like longer races I've done, I think the biggest thing that running has just, started to teach me and that I've seen through running is that just this idea of persevering through the pain. I think I kind of had this idea of just like at some point reach a point where it's not painful. They just run, long miles and it's not painful. And after running myself long miles, I realized that pain is actually just a part of the process. Like you just have to learn to endure it and to, kind of push through that mentally. It really has paralleled, especially the last few years as I've walked through my own seasons of significant like grief and suffering. This idea that pain will, I don't really like to use the word pain, more suffering, like will not escape us, will just be part of the journey. And it's not about suddenly reaching this place of, in our Christian walks, of being this elite to suffering. That's actually quite the opposite of the gospel. And really, it's about, okay, when we do experience suffering, what do we do with that? And knowing that ultimately God is going to use that suffering, like it talks about in Romans 5, to produce character and ultimately hope in Him. And so, I think that's been probably my biggest lesson, to just say, Lord, this isn't so much a question anymore of like, oh, why am I experiencing suffering? But more, Lord, like what is your definition of good? And if suffering right now is your definition of good for my life, then I want to endure that and push through that and learn more about you because of that. And so that's what we put our hope in, is eventually eternity with Him.
I love that. Two things that stood out to me that I think maybe we all could speak on in some context is that feeling of why that you mentioned, of like, I think this is the process. So for those of you that are listening, like, well, I've been asking why, like, why is this pain happening, or why is this suffering happening in my life? I think that question is a really good question, because it leads to like what your resolution was today of recognizing like what. It's not so much the why as it is the what, right? The why, and we can get really lost in the why. We can feel really desperate or even hopeless if we're trying to like reason with it, like, why did this happen, or what could I do to get out of it? But what I hear you saying is there's this like shift of how is God coming to me in the pain or in the struggle, rather than trying to escape it in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, it's a mindset shift in some ways, and having to redefine suffering and redefine it in light of like actually what Scripture says about it, that it will be part of our Christian walk. And we don't have to escape it so much as like lean into what He's doing in us in the process, and just also trusting in sovereignty too. That's a huge piece of it. But and befriending,
like from my experience of just like within the counseling process, it starts with befriending that pain. It starts with being able to say like, how am I feeling towards the suffering? And that is so much work of the healing process. It's like the process itself is just being okay, in not okay with it, but okay with recognizing that pain is a reality, and not trying to like sugarcoat it or deny it or bypass it with spirituality, but just being able to hold space for that reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I think, too, just like on that sitting, being able to sit with both things, and being okay with like having that suffering, but also like holding a place for where is God in this, and who can I lean on in this, is huge. So that was just a thought I had on that.
Yeah, I also really love the idea of like the mentalization that you had as a young person, like being able to say, oh, like I'll just get good enough so it won't be painful. And I think that's such a mistake when we're looking at this from a spiritual perspective of like, if I was just a good enough Christian, or if I just was strong enough in my faith, quote unquote, then I wouldn't be experiencing this pain. And I think that can be a huge distortion where we look throughout scripture and we see, goodness, that like pain is so present. And even Jesus, wept and cried out to the Father. And so I think there is a beautiful kind of invitation there of being able to say it's not necessarily the absence of pain, but the way that we kind of show up with the pain in our story.
Yeah. Because something I was thinking about too is like, I think it's really easy to equate pain with punishment, like that we think that, we're being punished because we're experiencing pain or trial or suffering.
Yeah.
Again, that's not the case. Like, that's not what scripture says. And, there's time and place for consequence, but not so much when, like I said, we're all going to experience, trial and suffering and pain. And it doesn't mean we're being punished at all.
Yeah, so I think that links us back to something, Ellie, that you've mentioned about context and how this process of running has kind of taught you how different contexts, both internally and externally, like our motivation or the people that are around us, how that impacts our spiritual journey. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So starting running really young, I just did it for fun with my dad. And in that context, it was just a fun like outlet that I got to share with my dad in a space that was like getting to know him better as we ran together. And then as like seasons changed, got older through high school, the context of like my surroundings became a lot harder because the support in the trials that were endured, I felt just more alone, and the motivation of my running became a like space for escape. How can I just forget about what's going on with these communities of people, with these relationships that I'm in, and how can I like just not think about anything? And so running kind of became that in those times. And in recent moving back to Virginia and running, obviously there's been ups and downs with that because I did live in Virginia at a time, and running with community like you guys was really something that I think I took for granted because that community was so present in my life and so uplifting. And so running, now that I've moved back, is like been in doing this race with you guys has been a space that like I got to use it as like seeing God in a different context of like he's a healer and he can be in this run with like a community of people that's pointing me to him, if that makes sense. And so like, yeah, connecting that like motivation of why I'm running to a place of like, well, where can I find God in that? Where can I look to him in this, instead of like a space of like, well, I don't want to think about anything in this. So yeah, I think that's kind of been a cool like perspective of seeing God just like through my running and how he's healed me in a lot of places through this. So
yeah, I love that idea of why do I run? That question, like I know we're talking about this in the context of running, but if we take that to a broader kind of spiritual process, it's like why? Like why am I pursuing God? Why am I enduring, right? Why am I setting out? Right? I used the scripture in last episode about pressing on, right? To finish the race set out for us. And so I think there is a lot of question about what is our motivation. And so you talked about just now, like two different kind of contexts of like a motivation of escapism or like coping, right? We're just like kind of trying to get away from maybe what's going on in our lives. And there's this other side of like connection, it sounds like, right? Like connection with your dad and like connection with others, maybe even connection with yourself and your body, and like how like those things can be like the tool, whether it be spirituality or running, whatever it is, can be something that allows us to connect, or it can actually disconnect or create more kind of challenge, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I heard.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's definitely what I was thinking, in like how God we can choose for him to be like, put him in a box and make him distant in those moments, or like invite him in. And so I think at those times, like, I kind of kept him at an arm's length of like, I'm just going to use this as like, forget everything. But then inviting him in, like, you realize how much he can show you through others, through, being outside and, in that verse in Hebrews, pressing on and finding him in that. So,
yeah, we're looking for Jesus, right?
Yeah.
I like that. Awesome. Well, we'll finish up with not just running alone, but running with others. And so, Nas, could you share a little bit about why community is something that's really important to you, and how you've seen that kind of embodied in this practice of running?
Yeah, so unlike you guys, I've always hated running.
So true.
Yeah, I never thought I would do a podcast where we were talking about loving running and how that impacted our spiritual growth. But it wasn't until like, I don't know, 4 years ago, I guess now, that I started running. And I think what really brought me to running was community. I was at the fire department then, and it was kind of like a way to have camaraderie and grow in a relationship together while doing something hard and pushing ourselves. With starting to do it with people, you were like one of the first people that I ran like together for my first 6 mile. My first 7 mile was with you. And doing it together just changed it for me, where I knew I wasn't going through this pain and suffering of running alone. Like you
connecting back to today.
Yeah, exactly. Like you couldn't take that away. Like I was still experiencing that, but like I knew that I wasn't alone in it. Like we were doing it together. And then it was also, I think when I run with people, it's not just that they're like there for me, but I'm also there for them. Like it makes me think of when I ran with you, Danae, at our race
Yes.
last year. Like I was going to tell us, kind of chanting each other on, like, and talk about pain and suffering. We're like, 1 mile left to go, and then it starts pouring and thunder, and we're just like cheering each other on. So it's not just like you were there for me, I was there for you, and we're not in it alone.
Yeah. No, I'll just add to that. Like, I was going to tell that story of last year because it was so significant. I mean, it was like 2 years after I'd walked through a pretty difficult season where I had probably experienced for the first time my community literally hold my arms through that season and let me ask the hard questions and doubt my faith. And like, I'm getting emotional. I like could get through that season without people. And it was probably the first time I let people do that. And so that run that year with you, Nas, was like, I don't know, I just felt like this really sweet picture that God gave me of like, I don't know, letting me see that community is so necessary. Like I did not make it through that race without you. Those last 3 miles I was dying, and you just like encouraged me the whole way. And for someone who likes to be very independent and do things by herself and not need other people, like, I don't know, it was just a reminder again that like I will always need people, and it's okay to need people. So
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that that's something that like you, Danae, I'm very easy to be like, I got it, I can do it. But I think something that running has taught me about the spiritual life is that we weren't meant to run alone. Like we weren't meant to do life alone. And so we talked about this a lot during our training, this last few weeks, of like when I ran my 5 or even my 4 mile runs by myself, I was like, this is the worst. And then then we run like 10 and 11 miles together, and it's like, oh, it was so fun, let's go get brunch, like. So it's just such a gift to have you guys literally both running with me physically, but then also walking with me spiritually. I'll go first in saying that with you, like letting people in, and as we say, like, let me love you, like letting people love us is such a process. And I think that's such a great way to connect it.
I will say too, like the running with people, especially Carly, who enjoys being down runs. Okay, we just went 3 miles. Like, okay, it does not feel like we've went 3 because Carly just told this about her entire week, and I'm so thankful.
I know. It's great.
The best.
I know.
Yeah, I do like those. Each run holds something specific for sure.
I want to kind of end our time by just thanking each one of you for, one, being willing to jump on here and share today, but also for continuing to run alongside me. And I hope that this can be an encouragement for those of you listening. We can find your people. And I know that there's seasons of that and seasons of not. And that's a whole other podcast episode that I think we could all share on. But to just encourage you with these thoughts, and pray that this next season of whatever it might look like, that you continue to run well. Find your people to do that with. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Therapy and Theology. If you have a question or topic you would like discussed on a future episode, please feel free to email me or drop it in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe to have each week's episode instantly downloaded to your podcasts, and see the show notes for resources mentioned in this episode. To access more content and join my monthly email list for the latest updates and info, visit my website at carlymargulier.com.